All right. All right. Thanks, everybody. I'm very happy to be here with you. And the name of my talk is What's for Dinner in 2050, the Future of Our Food in a Warming World. Um, and there we go. All right. So, first, a little bit about me and what brought me here today to be with all of you. So, I grew up in the Bay Area around all of this natural beauty that we have. And so, I've always felt protective of animals and nature. But as I went through medical school and residency training, and then began working as a psychiatrist on a college campus, I saw firsthand how climate change was affecting the health of my patients. Their asthma was worse during wildfire season, their antidepressants didn't work as well during heat waves, and they felt hopeless about their future. So I realized I couldn't truly help my patients unless I did my part to fight climate change. So I attended conferences, I read a lot of research articles, and I even published research of my own. And then I put my knowledge into action. As a member of Campbell's Climate Action Plan team, I'm introducing policies that support health equity for all Campbell residents. On the college campus where I work, I'm leading the effort to ensure sustainable and nutritious food is available for all students. And as a member of the Santa Clara County Medical Association's Environmental Health Committee, I'm working with policymakers and activists, just like you all here today, to protect our health and the health of our planet. Okay, so why food? I mean, aren't we talking about climate change? Well, yes, but because climate change disrupts every step of our food supply, from the farm all the way to our forks. And these disruptions affect our food security, meaning how much food we have to eat, how nutritious it is, and whether we can afford it. For example, extreme weather like heat and floods can kill crops like rice, wheat, and vegetables, making less food available for us to eat. And floods can also increase the number of insects that infest and destroy crops. Extreme heat can also cause water shortages, both to water crops and for farm animals to drink, like cows, pigs, and chickens, which can cause these animals to die due to dehydration and heat stress. And that reduces our supply of meat, dairy, and eggs. For example, our recent beef shortage and the high cost of beef right now is due in part to years of droughts. Climate change also pollutes our oceans and kills sea life, reducing our supply of seafood. And floods can wash away nutrients from the soil, making the food we grow less nutritious. High levels of CO2 in our atmosphere can also reduce nutrients in our food, like protein, iron, and essential vitamins. But even if the crops survive and make it off the farm, extreme weather like storms and floods can disrupt the transport of food to grocery stores, causing empty shelves and food shortages. Heat can also cause food to spoil more quickly at home and even before it makes it to the grocery store. Floodwater can be contaminated with dangerous bacteria like E. coli and Salmonella, which can contaminate our food and make us sick. And warmer weather can actually make bacteria and viruses stronger, so they spread more quickly and become more deadly. And all of this disruption in our food supply means a higher grocery bill for all of us. For example, do you guys remember the egg shortage we just had? Well, this is a perfect example of how climate change can affect our food supply. The warmer weather likely affected the migratory patterns of wild birds, making them more likely to come in contact with birds living on farms. And the warmer climate also helped the avian or bird flu virus survive, making it spread more quickly and become more deadly. And it killed so many chickens that there weren't enough chickens to lay eggs, which caused an egg shortage and the cost of eggs to skyrocket. And like other aspects of climate change, food insecurity affects some people more than others, including older people, communities of color, single mothers, individuals with disabilities, and low-income communities. So, by the year 2050, not only will we have less food available, there will be more people to feed about 10 billion of them, which means we'll need to produce about 56% more food in order to feed everyone. But we have to do it while also lowering food emissions if we want to meet the Paris Agreement. And we also need to boost the nutritional value of our food to offset the effects of climate change. So, as climate change worsens and the population increases, how do we make sure everyone has enough to eat? Well, to figure this out, let's first take a look at what we currently eat. Right now, our food causes a whopping 1/3 of all global greenhouse gas emissions. So, where do all of these emissions come from? Well, about 30% of our food emissions come from growing crops or food for us to eat, like fruits, vegetables, rice, and wheat. Another 20% of our food emissions come from processing our food. So, like emissions from tractors and farm equipment, packaging supplies like plastic, and transporting food from the farm to the grocery store by truck, boat, or plane. Okay, so that's about half of all of our food emissions. So, what's causing the other half? Animal agriculture, meaning all of the meat, dairy, eggs, and fish that we eat. But why does animal agriculture create so many emissions? Well, because animal agriculture is a massive industry. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, or the FAO, more than 90 billion animals are raised and killed for food every year. And that doesn't even include all the seafood that we eat. This is a CAFO, or a concentrated animal feeding operation, also called a factory farm, where as many as hundreds of thousands of animals live their entire lives in sheds like these. For example, a single shed like this can hold 20,000 or more chickens. So you can see how easy it was for bird flu to spread, even in so-called cage-free chickens. Dairy cows live much of their lives in a shed like this. And pigs raised for pork live their entire lives confined in crates so small they can't even turn around. In the US alone, about 10 billion cows, pigs, chickens, and other animals are raised and slaughtered for food every year. And 99% of those 10 billion animals live on a factory farm, just like this one. Here you can see the greenhouse gas emissions of different protein sources of food. And as you can see, animal products are by far the highest emitters. In fact, animal-based foods cause double the amount of emissions than plant-based foods. Beef in particular at the top is the single food with the highest impact on the environment. So, why is that? Well, when cows digest their food, they naturally release a gas called methane in their burps. Methane is a greenhouse gas emission, like carbon dioxide, which can build up in our atmosphere, trap heat, and cause global warming. Now, nature has always had its own way of balancing out this methane so that it doesn't harm us or our planet. Until we built massive factory farms with billions of animals burping out methane all day, which is far beyond what nature can balance out for us anymore. So why is methane particularly so bad? Well, because it's 80 times more potent at causing global warming than carbon dioxide over a 20-year span. But it's not just about methane. Animal agriculture requires a lot of land to raise animals and to grow the food that they eat. As a result, about half of the world's habitable or livable land is used for agriculture. So how do we get all this land? Is there just naturally occurring farmland out there for us to use? No, we have to create that farmland by bulldozing down trees. And as a result, animal agriculture is the leading cause of global deforestation, meaning the destruction of forests, including rainforests, and the leading cause of destruction of animal habitats and biodiversity loss, which is the loss of important ecosystems of plants, animals, and other organisms. In addition, factory farms are a major cause of air pollution and water pollution, affecting people living closest to them, who are disproportionately people of color. And this water pollution drains into our oceans, killing sea life and causing ocean dead zones. In addition, animal agriculture is also extremely wasteful. About 1 out of every 4 animals that are raised for food is never actually eaten. That means about 20 billion animals will be raised for food this year, only to be thrown away. And not only are the lives of those animals wasted, so are the land, water, and crops that went into raising those 20, causing so much methane. Why don't we just eat chicken instead of beef? Well, chicken emits about 5 times fewer emissions than beef per kilogram. So yes, you would reduce emissions. But it's not just about emissions, because to replace the amount of meat from one cow, you need about 200 chickens, and all the land, water, energy, and other resources that are required to raise those 200 chickens. But Americans are already replacing beef with chicken. And as a result, our chicken intake has more than doubled since 1980. Now, to put that into perspective, Americans now eat 1 million chickens every hour. So, yeah, eating more chicken doesn't seem like it's the answer. Okay, well, what if we just ate fish? Well, about 90% of the world's fish stocks are at or beyond sustainable limits, meaning some of them are being caught faster than they can repopulate. And fishing is also extremely wasteful. As much as 40% of what fishermen catch is thrown back into the ocean to die, also called bycatch. And it includes 300,000 whales and dolphins, 250,000 sea turtles, and about 50 million sharks every year. So, what can we do about this? Well, the good news is there's a lot we can do. Research shows that one of the most impactful ways we can fight climate change is by reducing how much meat we eat. In fact, not eating meat for 1 year is more effective than eating organic, composting, eating locally, and even reducing food waste. Using reusable bags rather than plastic bags is less than 1% as effective as not eating meat. And recycling is 4 times less effective than not eating meat. In fact, food emissions are so significant that even if we stopped burning all fossil fuels completely, we still cannot meet the Paris Agreement unless we eat less meat. Okay, but how much does eating less meat really help? Well, eating less meat and dairy can lower emissions by up to 75%. But it doesn't just lower emissions, it also reduces the destruction of our environment by reducing land use, biodiversity loss, and water use. So, eating less meat and dairy is healthy for our planet. But is it healthy for us? Because here in Santa Clara County, nearly 1 in 3 adults have either diabetes or prediabetes. And heart disease, like heart attacks and strokes, is the #2 leading cause of death in our county. Well, research shows that shifting from animal-based foods to plant-based foods lowers our risk for diabetes, heart disease, and even some types of cancer. So why are plant-based foods better for our health? Because they're packed with essential vitamins, minerals, and powerful antioxidants that reduce inflammation in our bodies, protect our DNA, boost our immune systems, and help us fight disease. After all, How does meat and dairy get its protein and other nutrients? Well, from the plants that the animals eat. So why not just go straight to the source, like these professional athletes who all follow plant-forward diets, like Germany's strongman, who can flip a car with his bare hands. And do you recognize these other professional athletes? Alex Morgan on the US women's soccer team, Venus and Serena Williams, Tom Brady, and Chris Paul. Plant-based diets are not only healthier for us, they're also more inclusive because about 65% of the world is lactose intolerant, including 50 to 80% of Black, Indigenous people of color, or BIPOC. So what's lactose intolerance? Well, it means you can't break down the sugars in dairy, which causes nausea and stomach cramps. In addition, BIPOC are 3 times more likely to identify as vegetarian for health reasons or religious or cultural reasons. So, plant-based diets support everyone's access to food that is healthy, nutritious, and good for the planet. So, back to our original question. As the population increases and climate change worsens, how do we make sure everyone has enough nutritious food to eat? Well, researchers found that if everyone in the US went plant-based, we could feed every American twice over without using any additional resources. That means we could feed everyone in the US twice as much food as they need without cutting down any additional trees, using any additional water or other resources. And we could still lower emissions, preserve biodiversity, reduce air and water pollution, and make healthy and nutritious food more equitable and inclusive for everyone. Now, reducing meat and dairy won't solve food insecurity by itself. We need to make other changes to our food system. But we can't solve food insecurity without reducing meat and dairy. That's why the United Nations, or the UN, has consistently urged developed nations, like the US, to eat less meat and dairy. And the IPCC, who is the UN's expert group on climate change, has concluded that one of the greatest shift potentials for mitigating climate change is switching to plant-based diets. But in the IPCC's most recent report on climate change, there are no clear recommendations for plant-based diets. Why not? Well, prior to the publication of this report, documents were leaked revealing that some of the highest meat-producing countries lobbied to remove this powerful statement from the report that plant-based diets can reduce emissions by up to 50%. They claim there's no scientific evidence to support plant-based diets as healthy or sustainable, despite the IPCC itself publishing overwhelming evidence in their previous reports. But the statement was still omitted, and so were any clear recommendations for plant-based diets. Instead, they use the vague term balanced and sustainable healthy diets. So even the IPCC and the UN aren't immune to the pressures of the meat industry. And you might be surprised to learn that the US government is no better. The United States Department of Agriculture, or the USDA, oversees what's called checkoff programs, whose main goal is to increase Americans' consumption of meat and dairy. That's right, our own government has a vested interest in every one of us eating more meat and dairy, the very foods that are making us and our planet sick. These checkoff programs create ads that you might have seen, like beef, it's what's for dinner, and those famous Got Milk ads. Sorry to call out Taylor Swift. They even help fast food chains like Pizza Hut sell more meat and dairy. For example, they help them create pizzas with 50% more cheese. To make matters worse, the USDA also creates the dietary guidelines for Americans, which is the primary advice Americans get on what to eat. And it's the foundation of all federal nutrition programs, including your school lunches. So, on one hand, our government wants all of us to eat more meat and dairy. And on the other hand, we trust them to give us unbiased advice on what we and our families should eat. Now, the dietary guidelines come out every 5 years. And so the new 2025 guidelines for the next 5 years should be out any day. And it'll be interesting to see what they say about meat and dairy. Even the EPA, whose mission is literally to protect human health and the environment, never mentions food, meat, or dairy as a way to reduce carbon footprint. And all this lobbying is working because most Americans do not believe that eating meat affects climate change. Now, when I learned about this, I thought, okay, I live in California, which is a leader in progressive environmental policies. So maybe I can raise awareness about climate and health effects of meat and dairy at the state level. So I contacted Cal EPA, which is California's version of the EPA. And I actually managed to get a meeting with one of their deputy directors. And they were surprisingly transparent about the fact that they are not allowed to talk about meat and dairy, whether it's for health or climate environmental reasons. The only way they're allowed to address food emissions is by food waste, which of course is very important, but also beside the point. They even have a picture of a hamburger on their website, and they even mention methane, land use, and emissions due to animal agriculture, but they still don't recommend reducing meat and dairy. Rather, this is used as an advertisement for food waste and composting. But then this is not surprising once you realize that California is the #1 dairy producer and the #4 beef producer in the US, which means that beef and dairy farmers have a lot of money and a lot of influence over policies that affect meat and dairy at the state level. So, what can we as activists do about this to lower our intake of meat and dairy? Well, one of the most powerful forms of activism is to change our own habits. And so we can change our own diets. And an easy way to get started is Meatless Monday. Just pick one day every week where you don't eat meat or dairy. Then think of a meal you already eat and just replace meat and dairy, for example, with vegetables, beans, lentils, or tofu. Now, there are tons of quick and easy and healthy plant-based meals that you can put together, air fry, or just microwave. And if you need recipes or ideas of how to get started, the Meatless Monday website has all the information you would ever need. You can just scan this QR code and get to that website. And I can share this later as well. You can follow Meatless Monday even when you eat out, as more and more restaurants have plant-based options on the menu. It's also a great way to inspire other people to eat more plant-based too. Because if every American did Meatless Monday for a year, it would be like taking over 7.5 million cars off the road or saving over 90 billion miles. Your school cafeteria is another great place to make a plant-based shift. Why? Because they serve thousands of meals every year. Just think of all the emissions, land, and water you could help save. A great place to get started to increase plant-based options in your school cafeteria is to check out Friends of the Earth's website. They're in the red box. And there's tons of resources, and they'll also provide personal guidance to you on how you can increase plant-based options at your school. They also have a couple great testimonials of some local Bay Area students who have increased plant-based options in their school. Another way to make a change is to take action locally. For example, you can ask your city to recognize Green Monday or Meatless Monday, like Los Gatos and San Jose did. You can even introduce a factory farm ban in your city or county. For example, there are currently 10 factory farms in Sonoma County, containing about 3 million animals. So last November, Sonoma County introduced a ballot measure called Measure J, which would ban factory farms in Sonoma County. Unfortunately, it did not pass, but it did inspire a similar measure banning factory farms in the city of Berkeley, which did pass with more than 60% of the vote. Now, Berkeley doesn't have any factory farms, but passing this measure ensures it stays that way, and it sets a great precedent for other cities to follow. So, might your city be next? You can also advocate for a plant-based shift through your city's Climate Action Plan, or CAP. Currently, none of the CAPs in the Bay Area recommend a plant-based shift, even though it's one of the most impactful things we can do as individuals and cities can do to mitigate climate change. So by joining your city's CAP team or asking your city to create one, you have a huge opportunity to educate your city council and fellow citizens on the importance of a plant-based shift. As a member of Campbell's CAP team, that's what I'm doing. I'm working to pass the first plant-based city policy in the Bay Area. And then I'm going to expand it to as many cities as possible. If you'd like to join my efforts, especially anyone from the Campbell Action Team, please feel free to email me. And let's pass the first plant-based policy in the Bay Area. So, in summary, eating less meat and dairy and more plant-based is like a Swiss Army knife approach to climate and health because it allows us to protect our health, our nutrition, and our planet all at the same time. And given our current climate crisis, we have no time to waste. Thank you.